We have already been working with list views. And for example, right now on my application, I have a list view of the history of the posts that I have added previously. But until now, we haven't really talked about how we can add more interactivity to these list views other than maybe selection. But there are two other things that we can do with list views that will improve the user experience when interacting with them. And that is exactly what we're going to do in this lecture. We're going to learn how to add two things: context actions and pull to refresh interactivity. So the user will be able to swipe one of these cells inside of our list view to see some new context actions, or in the case of Android, press and hold. And they will also be able to pull the list view down so it starts refreshing. It may request information again and update the list view accordingly. So let's learn how to add those context actions first. I have here the history page, currently with just a text cell, binding some experience property to the text and the created add property to the detail. To add new context actions is actually quite straightforward. What I'm going to do is, inside of the definition of the text cell in this format, add precisely the context actions. So I can start typing text cell and access the context actions for this particular text cell. Now this is also a property for a view cell, for example. So any kind of cell that you're working with will be able to have some context actions. And inside of the context actions, you can start adding menu items. So in this case, I am going to add one single menu item that will allow users to delete the element in this context. So all I have to do here is set some text. Let's set this to delete. And set a clicked event. Now, of course, you can use commands in here. Just to make this a little bit faster, I am going to be using a clicked event handler. And so you can see how the history page.saml.cs file has been opened, and we now have this event handler right here. Now I know that these will feel a little bit odd because we were already cleaning very well our code behind. Right now I feel like I'm doing something terribly wrong, but just bear with me. We're going to be doing this with an event handler just to simplify things a little bit and just focus on the context actions. So right now my menu item is ready, but since this one is going to be about deleting, I can also optionally set the isDestructive property to be true. This, in the case of iOS, is going to show the button with a red background. So it's simply what the user is used to. You should consider setting this to true. And so back in the menu item underscore clicked event handler is where you will want to add the functionality to delete this element. For this, and to follow a little bit the MVVM pattern that we established, we could create in the history VM class, in addition to the update posts method, a new public method that is going to be delete post. So this is going to be public. It's of course going to be async since it's going to be making some requests to the internet. It's going to be void and it's going to be delete post. Of course, this method will have to receive the post that is going to be deleted. So I will have this post to delete argument. In here, I could also follow something similar to what I did in the update posts method and have the delete method actually in the post class. This is actually going to be very similar to the insert method. So I can even just copy this one and paste it right below it, have it renamed to delete. And instead of calling the insert async method, I will be calling the delete async method, just like this. So back in the view model, I am going to be calling from the post class the delete method, which is going to be receiving the post to delete that this method is receiving, and of course it's going to be awaited, just like this. And by the way, in here I am forgetting something important. So I am going to navigate back to my delete method. I'm going to change this to be a task of, let's say, bool. And so in this case, I am going to be returning true if everything goes correctly, but I am also going to be trying this, and I am going to be catching any exception. So if any exception happens, in that case, I am going to be returning false. And so now back in the view model, I can await this delete method. So there you have it. Now back in my code behind here, I will be able to call from the view model. We already have a view model variable, if you remember, the delete post method. But of course, first I am going to need to know which menu item is requesting or executing this event. Now, the easiest way to do that is to the menu item bind to the command parameter. We're not precisely going to be using commands, but I can take advantage of the fact that I can bind, or that the command parameter is a property that I can access from the menu item, and bind the entire object by just writing binding. So by binding the entire object to the command parameter, what I can do is get the post by accessing the sender as a menu item. Of course, the sender is the menu item that is requesting or executing this event, and from this sender access precisely the command parameter, which I know is going to contain the entire object. And finally, the command parameter is going to be received as a post. So now the post variable is precisely of type post. And this one is the one that I want to pass to the delete post method that comes directly from the view model. And finally, because by this time the posts have changed, one of them has been deleted, what I want to do is from the view model call the update posts method again. This, remember, is already going to be updating, reading from the database again, updating the observable collection. And because from that observable collection we are binding to the list view, the list view is going to be updated automatically. So let's go ahead and test this out. So the next time that I run my application and I sign in, notice that in any cell I will be able to swipe, and now I see this context action. On Android, remember, this is press and hold, and the options will appear in the title bar. And now, because I have already created the event handler for this menu item, I will be able to click on delete. It is going to be deleted from the list view because it's deleted from the database. And remember, I am already calling the update posts method, so it is reading the database again, or the table, because it no longer exists in there. The list view is updated accordingly. So there you have it, it's very straightforward. Now, because this was very easy and very quickly, let's also implement the pull to refresh functionality. To do that is actually quite easy as well. The first step that you have to do is set the is pull to refresh enabled property of the list view to true. And just like this, the user will be able to pull the list view down and see an animation letting them know that it is refreshing data. But of course, we have to actually refresh the data. There are a couple of ways in which you can do this. You could use commands with the refresh command, which is probably the way that we should do it, but you can also use an event handler, the refreshing event handler, which is the one that we're going to be implementing to make this a little bit quicker to implement. Just keep in mind that the refresh command is the one that you would use if you were implementing MVVM. And it's going to be working the exact same way in which all of the other commands that we have used before work. Let's use this event handler and create a new event handler for when this list view is refreshing. And so back in the code behind, we will be able to see this event handler. Now, because we have already implemented all of the functionality, really all we have to do in here is from the view model, call the update posts method, just like that. And the update posts method is already going to be handling the request from the database and updating the observable collection. And because we are using an observable collection, that will update the list view. So the functionality is pretty much ready. But there is another thing that we have to do. It turns out that when we call the refreshing event handler or the refresh command, a property called isRefreshing is set to true. That property is the one that tells the list view to show the user that it is refreshing. It may be showing the user a certain animation, letting them know about that refreshing state. So we have to change this. And we can do that in two ways. We can either call from the post list view the endRefresh method, or we can set the isRefreshing property to false. Either one of them is actually going to set the isRefreshing property to false, so I am just doing it directly without calling the method. And this will let the list view know that the refreshing is done, so the list view can stop the animation. Now, in this case, we have a small issue because the update posts method is actually not a task, so it will execute immediately. And of course, there will be a background task working, but for this to be able to work perfectly, so the isRefreshing set to false is called only after the posts have actually been updated, we will need to change this to be a task. And because a task cannot return void, of course, we'll have to be returning a Boolean property. And we're going to do something very similar to what we did with the delete post. By default, I am simply going to be returning true, but if anything goes wrong, which I will be able to know by simply adding a try-catch block in here, I am going to be returning false, just like this. And because this update post method is now a task, I will be able to await the method. And because I will be awaiting it, I will have to set this event handler to async. I can leave the other parts of my code like this without having to await the update posts. In those scenarios, it's not necessary. But it is necessary in this one, because otherwise the isRefreshing will be changed to false immediately without awaiting for the post to actually be updated. So let's test this out again. I am going to run on my simulator, I am going to log in with my credentials, and now in addition to be able to see those context actions, I will be able to pull to refresh. Notice that I see that animation. And as soon as the update posts method has completed, either there were updates or there weren't, but it made a request to the internet, we see how the animation stops. If I pull again, I see the animation there for a few moments, and after the update posts method is completed, I see it disappear. And something very similar will happen on Android. We'll see also that animation up here and see the animation end once the update posts method returns the Boolean. So there you have it. You have learned how to add these two new interactivity options to a list view. How to add context actions and how to set them, for example, in a delete scenario to be destructive, so they have this red background, and how to add poll functionality, poll to refresh functionality.